And I think that means that we're live. Hi there. If you are just joining us, my name is Jay Frost, and you may know this already, but I'm the host of the Philanthropy Mastermind series, which is brought to you by DonorSearch. You won't hear much about DonorSearch today. If you're familiar with the series, you know I don't talk about them much here, but that doesn't mean we don't want to first acknowledge them for providing a platform where they allow me to have conversations like this one with leaders in the philanthropic field. And we've been doing that since 2016. So lots of programs that are all available to you. And you can check those out as well as the ones coming up over on donorsearch.net under the resources tab. And while you're there, if you want to take a look at what they do, I think you'll find it of interest because DonorSearch focuses on donors. What else? And without them, we can't do what we do. So if you're interested in your donors, and I sure hope you are, check out what they have to say about what they care about, what they're thinking about, and what they support. And that's really the crux of what we're going to be talking about today with Crystal Thompkins, who is, of course, right here, head of Philanthropic Solutions over at BNY Mellon Wealth Management. Thank you so much for being here, Crystal. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks for having me.
And I'll try to give you just a brief introduction from your bio. For those who haven't read it, you'll want to know a little bit more, and I'll ask later where else you can learn more. But for right now, she is, as I said, the head of Philanthropic Solutions for BNY Wealth Management. And in this role, she's been leading and coordinating strategy for all of wealth management's philanthropic services, including individual and family philanthropy, institutional endowments and foundations, planned giving, and donor advised fund services. I won't go through her whole bio because that would mean that she wouldn't have time to talk with us. But I hope that you'll follow the work that she does and the work that they are doing at BNY Mellon. It really is central to our understanding of what donors are all about, as you're about to find out. And as they've been writing about in this massive study that you and your team have conducted this last year. So first of all, maybe I can just ask you if you wouldn't mind introducing that for those who haven't heard about it before.
Of course. Well, this study, it's the inaugural year of this charitable giving study, and it's really the culmination of what we hear most often from our clients, both institutional and families, and that's what's everybody else doing? What are we seeing? What do you think? What is everybody else thinking? And so we wanted to tap into that and provide some insight and answers. And so I'm a data nerd, and so I said, let's look to the data. So we launched this survey really to uncover the motivations and the priority areas, how people are thinking about philanthropy, especially given the past 2 years when I think the conversation around philanthropy, there's really been kind of a shift in that conversation. And so, getting a lay of the land and tapping into that landscape of the mindset of the donors of today and tomorrow was the motivation for this study. So we partnered with a research firm and conducted a study of 200 investors, and the criteria for the investors were assets of investable assets of at least 5 million or more, and primary decision makers are involved in the philanthropic decision making within their household. So we launched it back in March, which was definitely an interesting time given kind of the market environment and the economic environment and uncertainty. But we were really, really pleased with quite frankly, the level of response. I think people are excited to talk about philanthropy, but also some of the findings. There were some surprises and some things that we knew and some things that we didn't know. That were really enlightening and really just highlighted how dynamic the philanthropic conversation is.
Yeah, I do want to ask you about the change that's happened over those 2 years, but I do want to save that too, because I have a feeling that's going to be a great comparison point. You've been working with this community for a while. I mean, I guess, 15 years right there at BNY Mellon. So just looking at the trajectory of that marketplace first, your customers, their interest in philanthropy over that whole period of time, maybe before the pandemic, and the other things that we've been, obviously working through the last 2 years. So, do you see were they as engaged with philanthropy before as they are now, more or less?
I think more so and also differently. I think, historically, the philanthropic conversation, one has been focused on answering just two questions, really: how much and to whom. And I've seen over time, but especially in the past few years, and I won't just, and I agree with you, it's not just kind of COVID related, but just overall rethinking the conversation around philanthropy. Over time, those questions have expanded to, how and why. And really, I find that donors are really seeking to find areas where they can make an impact, and we use that word a lot, but it's
Right.
no less impactful. But also I think that the conversation is much more inclusive in thinking about not just kind of donor recognition, how much we're going to get for, how much we can contribute to get the acknowledgement, but really thinking about, who is the philanthropist? How do we collaborate and create systems of change? So instead of, just support, we're starting to think about solutions. And it's really been a very exciting time. And really, for me, it's been, a time of great optimism, despite, some of the situations and what's been unfolding. In our society. I think that this has been, this conversation and the shift in the way that we're talking about philanthropy, it's really exciting, and it makes me excited to be in this space specifically right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe we can dig into the study itself because people may not know the scope, and it was pretty big. So, can you describe that scope a little bit? Both, the audience that was measured, their demographics, that sort of thing, and as well as the subjects that you tried to uncover through it.
Sure. So again, we 200 investors, and we really tried to capture a spectrum across all age ranges, and we were able to do that. And that was a lot of the interesting findings that we saw with kind of the generational differences. Geographic in scope, it was nationwide, US, nationwide. And folks that had indicated that they were involved in philanthropy in some way. So, the responses that we were looking for were not just, we don't have any thoughts about philanthropy, but people who had some engagement or philanthropic activity, pulling them into that conversation and getting good information around what their motivations are. So, some of the questions that we asked and were looking to get answered were, again, around motivation. Around that how question, how are they moving capital for impact in philanthropy, who they're working with. As in my work, it was really important for me to understand how, as wealth advisors, we can be contributors in that philanthropic conversation and what that can and should look like. But also where people are giving to, what they know about the tools and techniques, where they're getting their advice from. So it was a pretty extensive list of questions that we posed, and it was again trying to get at that answer for ourselves and for others. What is everybody else doing? Why are we doing? What is the motivation around it?
Right. Now, I do notice a couple people in the chat have noticed that there's a little bit of lagging on your video, Crystal. So I just want to let you know that. I don't know that there's anything we can do about it. Your
Okay.
audio seems to be coming through fine, but just to let you know. So we do want to acknowledge that we see that. We're in the world of Zoom still. So that's
yeah. And if it gets too bad, let me know, because maybe I'll just go straight to audio, and maybe that will resolve it.
okay.
But keep me posted.
All right, thank you. Yes, and so that's a good place to say that the chat is definitely for things like that. So please go ahead, and if you notice anything about the session that you want to let us know, please let us know there. But also, it'd be nice to just let us know that you're here. So if you'd like to say hello, I should have said that at the outset. Tell us where you're coming in from, well, maybe what organization you're with. We would love to see that, and I'm sure that that our guests would love to know. So please do go to the chat right now. You'll find it usually at the bottom of your screen, and just say hi. We also have a Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your screen as well, and you can go ahead and use that to post any questions. And I'm sure you'll have plenty about this if you haven't seen the report before. And I will make sure to include a link to it in the chat during the conversation, as well as put it in the description, in the YouTube description when this goes there. So a recording of this will be posted over at DonorSearch.net and on YouTube, as always, and that link will be included. So thank you all for saying hello there. We really appreciate that. And I did know that when you were thinking about this and the topics that you'd cover in the study, you probably thought about how broad do we want to go? I mean, both to get people to respond, that's always an issue in the nonprofit world in general, who's going to respond to this thing, but also just to, get to the most salient questions. But I know when we're designing something like this, there's often what's in our own heads, like what we think is important versus the people that we're talking to. So how did you determine the scope? And then how much do you kind of massage it when you started getting responses back?
Yeah, well, I have to give kudos. It was a team effort, and I have to give kudos to our marketing partners who reined me in because I wanted to ask all the questions. Again, data nerd, and I do believe someone very wise once said to me, we measure what we care about. So we wanted to make sure that we asked questions that were really going to give us information that was going to be useful for us, but also information to the entire philanthropic community. So we tried to one, give respondents an opportunity to have choices, right? So we weren't not so many choices that they couldn't decide around how to choose, what to choose, but to give them enough choices so that we could glean from that additional information, and really take them on a trajectory from okay, how engaged are you in philanthropic planning to begin with, all the way through to what does that plan look like? So we started with questions around, how engaged, how engaged are you around philanthropy? And then we ask questions around, okay, well, who do you work with when you're thinking about doing something in charitable giving? And then it was around, well, how important is it to you? What part does the philanthropy play? How do you prioritize it? And then we went all the way from there to, the level of investment, what types of investment, how do you align mission and your values with the way that you express your philanthropy? How engaged is your family in making those decisions? So it's trying to capture the entire kind of philanthropic life cycle, the giving life cycle, from the idea to execution, and then pulling in all of the stakeholders to that conversation, and the impact that people wanted to make.
Now, you were studying the client pool, though, correct? I mean, the BNY Mellon client pool. It actually,
and Jay, just a point of correction, it actually wasn't our clients. We actually wanted to get a broad scope of data. So it was an open search, not BNY Mellon clients.
Okay, thank you for saying that, because I did see that when I saw some of the stats that it looked like you had younger people as well as older people there. And I thought, wow, this says a lot, because it means that you're pulling a lot of people in. So as you thought about that, you were clearly thinking about the sampling for wealth, although that's the preponderance. I guess it was high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals. Is that right?
Yes, investors 5 million and more investable assets. Yep.
Right. And then different age groups, because I don't know if I saw Gen Z in there, but I saw everything.
Yeah, we didn't capture Gen Z in this report, although we got the next generation. Gen Z is actively involved, but we stopped at the cohort at millennials for purposes of this study.
Sure. Well, that's a huge pool right there.
A huge cohort.
But were there other markers for diversity that you looked at? Because that's been something that we've all been talking about a lot. I mean, hopefully we should have been talking about that forever, but particularly in philanthropy the last couple of years. So was that a factor in what you thought about?
It was a factor to the extent that we want to capture and track that information so that we can start to look at trends around diverse populations. So while we didn't put parameters around the diversity metrics, particularly racial, ethnic diversity and gender diversity, we did capture that information because going forward, we are going to start to look at that data for trending so that we can identify different communities and how giving the trends and giving trends are changing and growing or in those communities over time. So we didn't place specific parameters, but we're tracking that data and all of those details are in the report itself.
Wow, that's interesting on another level too, because you were looking for it, which makes sense that as data nerds that you would be doing that. But I'm thinking that means also, since it wasn't a specific parameter, that people are self-reporting. So that means people are getting comfortable with talking about the relationship between identity, however we're defining that, because they are defining themselves, and then their activity, both as investors, but also as donors.
Absolutely. And I think the more that we can continue to ask these questions, which is why we included those questions in this study, the more we can normalize asking those questions again. We measure what we care about. So the way that we can capture this data and be more representative in the way that we present findings such as this along diverse lines, I think that just really helps all of us do our work better so that we can connect our communities and connect with communities in a way that's going to be impactful and meaningful and inclusive in a way that data can help us get to that point. If we know the audience, then we can make that effort to connect better.
And just one last follow-up on that issue, because the people who are sitting in this room with us are almost all non-profiteers. And these issues about, first of all, to get people to do surveys is not always easy. There are different stakeholders involved in that, right? Trying to convince people we should survey, and if so, what do we ask? But then anything that would be perceived by some within an organizational framework, whether it's a board member, whatever, as sensitive, however that's defined, sometimes it doesn't get asked at all, and then we don't learn these things. So is there an opportunity, do you think, for nonprofits to also take a page from what you've just done and think about donors in that same way, and just open the door to having a conversation where people can kind of identify themselves the way they wish, and then we use that information to better understand people on their terms?
Yes, and I think that, I think it's not only, an opportunity, I think it's almost an imperative for nonprofits to start to think about how to go ahead and ask for that data, because then we can, it impacts our work, and we're in a relationship business, bringing people together to make, positive change. So, to the extent that we can understand and know who our audiences are, and even equally as important to know who they aren't, who's missing from the conversation that we should be having. Data is the way to get to that. So I strongly encourage everybody who's listening and watching to make sure that you include those data points and ask those questions so people can self-identify, and so that we can continue our good work of bringing people together and connecting with audience who may have otherwise, and not may, but have been otherwise excluded from a lot of the important conversations, but who are still making positive and impactful contributions to change.
Yeah, and the reason I'm harping on this is because we don't talk about it a lot, but it's also come up topically in a couple ways. One is nonprofits talking about gathering that information for researchers, prospect researchers. So that's been an issue or topic of discussion recently, but also because Giving USA, when it comes out, and I'm contextualizing it with the study that you've done, because it's such a help as we try to understand these issues more deeply for high net worth individuals, and Giving USA doesn't really focus on that. So when Giving USA looks at these issues, they haven't really dug into some of these topics because it's just sort of outside the scope of what they're thinking about. And one of those areas is, again, kind of leaving opportunities for people to talk about themselves because they're largely data points. Maybe that's a good place to jump into the data itself. I saw that you have 10 key findings in the study. And by the way, I keep saying report and study as if they're the same thing. In fact, you have two different things.
We do. And I get confused too, so no problem, Jay.
Okay. So this one we're talking about at the moment, I guess, is the study
Correct.
that you've done. And that was released in March. Is that right?
Yeah, the data was, we put it out in the field and got responses in March, and then it was released a few weeks later.
Okay.
And so we even though I think there is a little bit of survey fatigue from people, we were very we were very pleasantly surprised that we had this out in the field for 2 weeks, and we were looking for 200 responses, and we got it well in advance of the 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So I think, again, it speaks to one, a good research partner, but two, people are eager and anxious to talk about the way that they're giving their philanthropy. It's important. And so we were very pleased with kind of the how easy this was. Knock wood.
Yes. So there are a whole bunch of key findings in there that in fact, I'll just share a couple, and then maybe you can give us a gloss on them. I don't know if the key findings are there are 10. If they were put in order, were they put in any particular order for any particular reason, or
No, I think it was in order. I think the reason was it was just kind of the order of the questions.
okay.
That would the way that we posed the questions. So again, it was kind of starting at the journey,
Okay.
and walking through that life cycle. So that's where the findings are. So it's not like David, a top 10 list, but
Okay. Yes. You almost said David Letterman. Yes. Okay.
I did.
We have to give him credit for something. So so key findings. So number one, most have a giving strategy. Many would consider one. And that's over 56%. You also have another one here. This is one of the things that I was wondering about. There's also that 91% of the respondents are committed to giving as a part of an overall wealth strategy. So I have a couple of things I wanted to ask you about that. First of all, 91% committed to giving is amazing. And it also goes to the heart of this because you're only looking at high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals, right? $5 million plus in investable assets. I'm repeating what you just said in case someone missed it, because there's a tendency to conflate different audiences. This is not like the U.S. Trust Survey. It's
Right.
not like the people in Giving USA. This is not like the people in your database. It's a subset of people who are thinking about their investment strategies and thinking about philanthropy, and those people are committed. 9 out of 10. That's not true for the general population, where now we see it's now 49.6% is the latest statistic of people who give in the United States. It's pretty scary. So these people, has that number, can you tell if that's gone up or down, 91%, or is that kind of consistent?
I don't have specific data around kind of a trend, but like this is one of the numbers that I will say it was surprising to me that it was this high, especially when you do have the context of kind of different cohorts that are studied by other groups. 91%, 9 out of 10 is, anecdotally, that's been my experience. I'll have to say, again, job security in the philanthropic space is great because, I am, one of the first people in the wealth planning conversation that's up to bat now. Whereas before it was, let's take care of taxes, let's take care of the estate, let's take care of the kids. Oh, and if there's something left, we'll give it to charity. Now it's, we need to think about our wealth differently and how we can build a legacy of impact and change with our wealth. So let's talk about that and build a framework for our wealth strategy with that as the center for many, many people. So the 91%, it was good to see that affirmation that the kinds of conversations that I could point to anecdotally and that I've been hearing from others anecdotally, there's some basis in that in the data.
Yeah. And so are you getting a sense from those other conversations post study that this is a trend line, that more people care about this now than they did before?
It is. I believe that's going to be a trend, and whether we see the amounts of giving go up or down, that is always fluid.
Right.
But I think the tendency and the priority of giving, I think that that's a trend that's sustainable. And I think that that was one of the things that 2021 bore out, is opposed to 2020, when we saw kind of spikes in level of giving as a response to the urgency of the pandemic and other societal and racial justice movements. 2021 was a year, it was like, okay, is this sustained giving, or was this just a blip in the time frame? And in 2021 showed that, yeah, those levels of, at least the amounts of giving, were sustained. And with this study in having taken place this year, it's showing that the intention is still there in 2022. And I'll point out again, this happened in March. And if you'll recall, the market in March was not that great. And so when we're talking about investors who are still, prioritizing giving at a time when market indications were not favorable, I think that that's a statement.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much we can dig into there that might go above my head, although the audience might get it. But I'm wondering if, as the market goes down, are the people who are still jazzed about giving, are they that way because they sold off before the rest of us did, so they have some proceeds and they want to do something with it, or are they just so committed that it doesn't matter if the stock's up or the stock's down, they're going to give?
Yeah, I think that there is, again, the amounts might change, but I think the commitment to giving is there. And I also think that one of the takeaways from the level of giving and the way giving changed during COVID was that there was a lot more transparency between the need that was there and what nonprofits needed to accomplish the things that they needed to accomplish, versus in sharing that in a way that allowed donors and investors in change to really commit to, we're going to do whatever it takes, right? So if you need us to fund Toner, then we're going to give you a budget for Toner. So unrestricted giving, and that conversation around unrestricted giving, and why what the needs were: capacity building, operational funds for general operations, all of those types of conversations that were much more open and candid in COVID. I think that people are still committed and understand that that's part of giving too. There's the mission work, but there's also building capacity to do the mission work. And so I think that I think we'll see, people who were already committed to giving continue with their commitment, because they now have a better and deeper understanding. And again, not support, but investing in solutions. And I think that change in mindset is really going to be sustainable.
Wow, there's so much in there too, because I've often wondered how much is the push and how much is the pull, how much is demand and how much is supply. But what you just described sounds like nonprofits were being more open about their needs. They weren't being shy and saying, I just need a few pennies to operate. They were saying, hey, I need Toner. And the donors were more receptive because they understood what was going on in the world, and they wanted to be helpful. And then when that was paired, so they said, this is what we need, they were willing to give it. Is there a lesson in that as we go forward, regardless of the economic circumstances and health parameters, and hopefully the continued fight for racial justice and equity, is if nonprofits are just as open, and are they going to have more success than if they go back to kind of not wanting to talk about what their real needs are?
Yeah, I think, again, we're in a relationship built business, right? And so I think to the extent that we there's a continuation of that level of transparency and candor on both sides of that, on both sides of that equation. And I think that it's going to be difficult to go back because I think that as we've seen, there's still a lot of need there. Now that we've looked under the bed, and what we saw crawl out from under there the past few years was not pretty, and so we can't, I'm in the work that I do, and in talking with leaders and nonprofits and investors in change alike, everyone agrees that this was not a one and done situation that we're talking about. This is going to take a sustained level of giving. In a sustained level, and a new appreciation, understanding about what is actually involved and needed in order to make the types of changes that are going to really make a difference and be sustainable over time. So I'm one on, you can mark me down as a bold. I encourage nonprofits and investors to think boldly. And I think that's a bold idea for nonprofits to take, is that, yes, we're going to be honest with you about the needs of our organization in order to fulfill our mission, and staying mission focused and finding investors in that mission, and making sure that there is an alignment and understanding of expectation and a communication of results as well.
You have used that word investments and investors, advisedly, and I know that I get the sense that you're not just speaking from the financial world as you say that. Talk a little bit about the people that you've studied, but as well as the people that you're talking to in your line of work, where they see these contributions as not just giveaways, but as investments.
Yeah, it really is. I think there's a couple of different things that have been really stark and that were affirmed in the study as well. One is that there is a real, as we look at younger generations, there is a real, not just, expectation, but demand in, establishing finding solutions for change, right? So that's why we're moving from that support conversation and the how much conversation to the impact in sustainability conversation. And that's really, really apparent in younger generations, which I think has helped shift that conversation. In the study, as we look at that 91% that had a giving strategy, it was 100% of Gen Xers and 97% of millennials. So, this is important. And they also said that, hey, it's not just enough that we have it part of our wealth strategy. They said it's important for that generation. It's important for our wealth advisors to understand our values when we're thinking about making investments in change, or our portfolios too, in sustainable and in responsible investing. So it is this kind of, there's been this shift in the conversation with the younger generations who are demanding, a proof of impact, I'll say. But there's also that tension, a little bit of tension with the older generation and the matriarchs and the patriarchs and the founders around, okay, well, this is the way we've always given, and this is how we do things, and these are the organizations, and kids, you come along with us, and kids are saying, no. So it's really trying to find that alignment around family values, and then taking that alignment around values and turning that into their expression of the investment in change that they each want to make. It may look different from the older generations to the younger generations, but if we can find that alignment around values, then we get to have those conversations around, we get to have different conversations, or conversations just in general, because sometimes not everybody is ready to talk about the differences in the way that they execute their philanthropy in the family. But that legacy conversation is top of mind. And so, as I'm working with families and working with nonprofits too, thinking about how to incorporate a multi-generational approach to giving, that's been paramount in all of the conversations. But again, I'm intentional in the use of the word investment, because it's an investment in change. And that's the movement in the philanthropic conversation, not just who's giving, but who's being given to, how that giving looks like, and what the communal and societal benefit is going to be.
Right. There's so much in there too. I mean, one is that hopefully that finally drives a stake through the heart of the idea that millennials are all sitting around just thinking about themselves, because there's a higher percentage of them giving than there are of other generations, and Gen X is even higher. So you've got a lot of generous people. But as you just said, maybe they define these terms about where they're going to find their impact through their charitable investments differently. I'm curious, do you see a difference in the way people are even describing it, meaning that they don't even say philanthropy? I mean, are there some people who say, no, this is about philanthropy, and other people saying they're choosing another way to describe their activity?
Yeah, no, there definitely is. I mean, the investment language is very common now as opposed to philanthropy, because there have been, there is a school of thought that philanthropy does have some negative connotations in terms of kind of, wealth gathering and who has wealth and access to wealth. But I think that, who we describe as a philanthropist and how that and what is philanthropy. One of the things I remember growing up is whenever you need to know what the definition of something is, you go to the dictionary. And so I remember, I was getting ready for a presentation around this very topic about, what is philanthropy and how is it changing? And the first thing I did was go to the dictionary and look it up. And in the dictionary, it's still described as financial gifts for charitable benefit. And I think that what we're seeing is the shift of just recognizing that financial benefit is just one component of making societal change. There's also, the inclusion of everybody in that stakeholder conversation, regardless of means. And I think that the investment that especially younger donors are making in the philanthropic in change is one that is much more aligned with a broader definition of philanthropy, whatever we call what the act is. That definition has definitely broadened in scope, and there's a level of real demand from those of us in the advising space, and whether it's in the nonprofit advising or for-profit advising. There's a recognition that we need to accept that there's more to this conversation than us putting money in a trust or putting money in a DAB. It's okay, what's going to be the ultimate benefit coming out of that?
Absolutely. So if we've got 91% of these folks giving, which is pretty extraordinary. Again, we're talking about $5 million plus. I've repeated that a couple of times because I know that people have asked about that in the chat. But 56% currently have a charitable giving strategy. So if you've got just over half who have a strategy, but the other ones, but 90% of them are saying that giving is a part of overall wealth strategy. This is interesting to me because, again, it's just words, but I like words too. I also go to the dictionary. Mm-hmm. Definitions mean things, words mean things. So there's wealth strategy and there's charitable giving strategy. As you've had this conversation, both for the study, but also in your work, can you help us untangle those two pieces? What's the difference? What's the similarity? And is any of this conversation helping people to build a charitable giving strategy, especially through wealth advisors, so that nonprofits can figure out how to, what's the role in this whole thing?
Yeah, I think that historically wealth advice has been focused around tax and estate planning. And of course, that's still a huge part of wealth advising, and building a portfolio of an investment portfolio and a strategy to address kind of lifestyle needs, right? But I think, and then on the nonprofit space, as I mentioned earlier, there's a tendency to kind of say, okay, now once we settle that, let's bring in the philanthropic conversation. Well, our approach is different in that, that is your tax and estate plan and your philanthropic strategy and your legacy planning for your family, and your business strategy and your lifestyle. All of those things need to work together. And so it was a pleasant surprise to see that the wealth advisor is the one that is the most connected to the charitable planning conversation. More people who do have wealth advice do have a charitable giving strategy. When we stratify, when we look deeper into the data, that 91% and that 56%, those who work with a wealth advisor, 63% of that 56% who have a giving strategy, the majority of those are working with a wealth advisor to develop that strategy. Then there's the 56% who have a giving strategy, but then there's 22% who don't have one but would consider one. And then there's another 22% who don't have one and don't have plans for one. So I like to think of that as a 44% opportunity for our, for us as wealth advisors and our nonprofit partners as well, to say, hey, here's a real opportunity to help those invested in some small way in philanthropic efforts, to help them say, hey, we can do multiple things through giving. It's not necessarily a solution. It's part of an overall strategy that could solve many solutions when you're planning. So
Right.
whether it's, family legacy, bringing kids in to understand the importance of giving to you, whether it's, thinking about, specific areas of issues and impact. Our nonprofit partners are they are issue experts. So we want to work with them to help bring them into the conversation so that people can give smart and
Right.
know that they're connected and engaged in a meaningful way with their philanthropy. It's 44% of opportunity where philanthropy can be integrated into a lifestyle conversation, into a legacy conversation, and not just a tax solution or a family solution. It's both and, definitely. And I think more nonprofits should think about, how to work with wealth advisors and other stakeholders in the philanthropic conversation, get everybody at the table together, because that's where that type of collaboration and that type of open discussion and comprehensive discussion is what's going to help move the needle forward in addressing some of these challenges in our society.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, because even in this study, I think there's a reference to personal connections and personal satisfaction being top motivators for giving.
Mhm.
And so that kind of personal connection, it sounds like trust. And trust is this big issue we're all talking about, the Edelman's Trust Survey, and trust in nonprofits, trust in government, et cetera. But it's maybe not always true, but it's often true. If we get to know people, we trust them more. I mean, as long as we're all doing well by one another. And so if you've got a financial advisor and you know them and they're talking about philanthropy, and it becomes a trusted conversation, then I can see why people would then have a charitable giving strategy as a part of their overall wealth strategy, their personal life strategy. Nonprofits often don't have that conversation, not because they don't care or they don't like these people, not because they don't trust one another, but it just doesn't seem to be something that they're comfortable with. How could they do what you just suggested, which is to get closer to, for example, the wealth advisors, and then be a resource both for the wealth advisors and, by extension, the wealthy individuals that they are working with?
Yeah, I think it's around, not just cultivating a network, because I know that many nonprofits have advisory councils and invite, wealth advisors, attorneys, CPs, and other, advisors into, into it, a council to kind of move the needle and engage them in their work. I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen nonprofits struggle with is how to keep them engaged and how to, actually get their messaging and their mission to, out to the advisors, and then by extension out to their clients. And there's two things that I would suggest that are very, very important. First, give your advisors something to do. If there's a way for, and I'm a believer in that, just in every sense, give everyone something
Right.
to do, right? Your council members, and you brought them there, these brilliant, smart people who obviously have either an affinity to your organization or are invested in the community where they work and reside. Give them something to do. Be specific, tangible, set goals and expectations and objectives for why you're bringing them together and how to support your mission. And then the second thing is, it's really important to arm your advocates. Arm your advocates with good information so that they can be effective advocates. And not everybody's busy, and there's a lot of information being thrown at everyone at any given point in time. But if you can arm them with key pieces of information that help them tell your story, you can come and do cleanup batting once they get the conversation to a specific point. but they really do need kind of key pieces of information that help them have, when when they're talking with a client about, their tax situation, and the client mentions, hey, I've been really doing a lot with the museum lately. Well, did you know about the blah, blah, blah at XYZ museum or exhibit or this new initiative? Routinely arm them with information, because that's as an advisor, that's what gives us even stronger connections to our client. If
Right.
we can show them that we're tuned in, listening and tapping into, and can give them some connections to others to feed their passion. So give people something to do, give your advisors something to do, reach out to them to build that. When you build that network, give them something to do, and arm them with information so they're effective advocates for you.
It sounds like maybe somewhere along the path you've been on two sides of that equation, where maybe people gave you something to do, or you helped them to figure out what that would be, and others who didn't.
Yeah, I have. And I will share that, what I most often hear from our clients who are looking to invest in a specific area of focus is they want to focus their giving.
Mhm.
And what that's a really kind of simple way of saying we want to make a bigger impact. And so give them something to do. Give the advisors something to do. Give your board something to do. Because I've been on a lot of councils where I didn't have anything to do. We did a lot of ideation. And there were a lot of brainstorming sections. And at the end, our nonprofit partners are copiously taking notes and setting to-dos and follow-ups, but we walked away as advisors with nothing to do. So it's really, I can't stress that enough. It sounds so simple, but it's something that I think is often overlooked in putting councils and committees and networks together, is that actual tangible action, so that everybody's working towards a known goal. And then you have some metrics and accountability, and you can highlight how successful you've been in the initiative.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I did want to ask you about this this other piece with COVID, and maybe I should ask that more broadly. If there's been something in particular as you've gone through this process with the study that has particularly surprised you, either through the lens of what we've all been living through the last couple of years, or beyond that. If as you were doing this, you thought, wow, I had no idea, and that's changing your perception about these things.
Yes, I think one of the things that was really surprising was that kind of the level of engagement that people indicated that they were going to sustain. So not only was the majority indicated that they were planning on changing their level of giving over the next 2 years, because we, 2 years from the prior 2 years, we wanted to be forward thinking. What are you planning on for the next 2 years? The majority indicated that not only were they going to change their plans, they're likely going to be giving to more organizations in increased levels of giving, especially in the younger age ranges. And that was actually kind of surprising, because again, it kind of affirmed that 2020, 2021 giving wasn't a shot in the dark, and it wasn't kind of a one-time event. So it was pleasantly surprising to see that no, people are really invested, and they're planning on doing more, and giving to more organizations, and more in a variety of causes. And I think that for our nonprofit listeners, I think that's encouraging, because I think often nonprofits come from a place of scarcity, and they are and build strategy around scarcity, that there's not going to be enough. And I get that in a lot of ways. But I'm a firm believer that the pie is plenty big. The pie is plenty big. There's enough to eat for everybody, and enough to give away for everybody. But we need to, the goal is, and the objective is to help connect your mission with people's passion. And if we do that, I think that, that what we saw in the study, what people said in the study about giving more organizations, that will play out well. That will play out as we see over the next couple of years. So.
Now, I just want to let everybody know I'm in the process of putting a link to this study in the chat right now. There will also be one again in the YouTube description. But before we go on, I want to ask you a couple more questions from the audience before we wrap up. If people want to reach out to you or to your service area within the company, what's the best way to learn more about your work? And besides getting a link to this study, is there anything else that they can do to kind of follow what you're up to? And
Sure. So I'm open on LinkedIn, and then our website is bnymellonwealth.com. All of our thought leadership, the study, and other pieces are included on our website. There's contact information there. My DM me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk data, especially because we have this study that was the high net worth study, but we also had our charitable giving report, which is in its 10th year, that gives actual client data around our clients' life income giving vehicles. So bnymellonwealth.com is a great resource. And again, I'm on LinkedIn, so happy to connect there as well.
And just, I know that's from the other report, but do you have off the top of your head just kind of roughly how much money we're talking about that is the average giving from that population that you've been studying there over the 10 years?
Yeah, so for and I can't have it off the top of my head for aggregate numbers, but what I can tell you are averages over the past few years. And this is focused primarily on life income gifts, right? So charitable trusts, charitable gift communities, planned gifts. Last year was the first year, 2021 was the first year we saw an uptick in charitable trust giving. Even though the amounts actually were smaller on average gift amount was smaller on average, but more of them. So I think that people are starting to think about trusts differently, particularly as the AFR is creeping back up, and that charitable deduction is much more incentivizing. But again, charitable trusts can address a lot of different issues. So, and then charitable gift annuities have always remained kind of a stalwart, kind of, flat, flat. But I think one thing that has been sustained over the past decade is the charitable gift annuity conversation was like, we have about a dozen of those that are now million plus. So people are really liking charitable gift annuities for those organizations that issue them. And charitable gifts, charitable trusts are also in, they're averaging above $250,000 as a starting point, and people are consistently adding to unit trusts as well. So, but the aggregate numbers I don't have off the top of my head, but studies out there on the link.
Right, and I just put a link to that also in the chat in case people want to take a look at it, and both of them are wonderful. So I hope you will, and to follow these reports over time, because you've got the report, again, I keep saying report and study as if the same thing, but the report, 10 years of data, and you're continuing that. But the study also, you'll be visiting this again in the next year?
Yeah, we're looking at how, then welcome feedback on, questions that, you want to see answered, because that's the evolution of both of these studies. Is what's going to give us the most information in order for us to effectively do our work and help donors make an impact. So, but yes, we're thinking about how we can revisit this study, build it out for additional data points, and start some trending. So we're thinking. It's in the works.
Along those lines, we had a couple questions earlier. One from Nicole, who had asked if you're finding that donors are more concerned with reputational risk these days and what they're involved in, especially from, for example, an ESG perspective. Is that something you have asked or that you've sensed from people as you've talked to them?
Yeah, I think that, the reputation on both sides of the equation, right? From the nonprofit perspective and working in accepting gifts, but also from the donor's perspective and making sure, again, that their values are aligning across the board in terms of vision in the way that organizations are carrying out their work. So we are getting more questions about diversity. We're getting more questions about mission-aligned investing. We're getting more questions and requests for information around Again, capacity building, and is this gift going to be sustainable for this organization? There's a lot of money that a small organizations were entrusted with and had the benefit of, and there's more. So there's definitely, that reputational risk of making sure that there's true alignment in both the donors' values and the nonprofit mission.
Right. We also had one from Allison who had asked if you think, as you look at all of this and together, rolling it all up, if you think that this means that there will be more donors in the end, that you think that there is actually going to be a rise in the percentage of people, maybe the numbers of people who are giving, at least in the, this cohort, the $5 million plus group.
I think so, because we touched on it at the beginning, but there's other studies that show that donors of color are a huge growing cohort of donors in engaging in philanthropy in record numbers.
Right.
Younger donors are engaging in philanthropy in record numbers. So I think that there's still a lot of untapped passion for change, that we can that is going to lead to more engagement in philanthropy in whatever way that looks like, right? Whether it's financial investment, engagement, or other ways. There's opportunity there, and it's finding ways to be innovative and inclusive, and think about how to bring in more people under the net into the philanthropic conversation. But yes,
Right.
there's definite opportunity to increase donors, if we engage as we should.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much for all of this, Crystal. Really do appreciate it. You're sharing these insights and doing these studies, shepherding them with your team. Really so valuable to all of us in the sector. We're grateful for your time and for the contributions that all of you are making. And I want to, of course, once again, let everybody know that if you look in the chat before we disappear from the screen, you can see links to these two things. Go ahead and grab those. You definitely want to read these reports. And I might suggest share them with your colleagues. Don't keep this information to yourself, because like what you were saying before, Crystal, if this is a matter of getting people in a position where they're willing to talk honestly about what the needs are, that's sometimes at the board level. If it's a matter of getting people to go out and develop a relationship with people who are financial advisors and other experts that we often don't give a specific job description to, we don't utilize all that they can do and the contributions they can make with their intellect and their professional expertise, then that's a shame. And it could be that that's a colleague of yours who needs to have that discussion with you. So these reports hopefully will facilitate that. So again, so grateful to you for doing this, and hopefully maybe when the next report rolls around, you can spend a few minutes with us again.
Absolutely, Jay. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you. And I want to thank all of you for hanging out with us. If you're watching this later online, do make sure that you share this recording with others. And of course, if you are interested in other sessions in this series, the Philanthropy Mastermind series is doing a total of, what is it? I think it's 25 this quarter and 65 this year. All of that will be under the resources tab at DonorSearch.net. Again, DonorSearch is the company that's underwriting all this. So we're so grateful to them for doing that. And while you're there, just check out what they have to say about your donors, will you? Because ultimately we can't do any of this without them. And so with that, stay healthy out there, and we'll see you next time, maybe even this afternoon at 3:30. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.